Welcome to Is It Really That Good? A new series where I play games a little while after they've come out to see if they're really that good or bad after the hype has died down and get a real fresh perspective on it. And today we're talking about Death Stranding 2. Now, you can't help but not get excited about a Hideo Kojima game. But, I mean, is it really that good? In the context of the first game, yes, but I don't know if the sequel lives up to the hype. Now let's just dive deeper into that statement. You know, with Death Stranding 1, Kojima was coming off the back of being fired by Konami and then the cancelled PT game. And his whole premise was, connecting people in a time of like craziness and social media and everything, and then we all know what 2020 happened, and we were like, whoa, it's so, it's so fresh, he's a prophet. And actually, I have a video on Kojima and his predictions, so watch that if you want. But, the first time around, I think people were kind of split. Kojima always makes a good game to play. Like, it's always polished, it's never broken. And it was novel. It was new. Like, wow, we're careering along this kind of broken America. And that carried it a long way, because ultimately, at the end of that game, where you spend dozens of hours just shuttling cargo. But there was something therapeutic in that. But when they announced Death Stranding 2, I thought, how different is it going to be? And I think I was both right and wrong. And we'll get into this as we go. Death Stranding 2 is basically just Death Stranding 1, but mechanics-wise, with some added mechanics in that kind of mean you don't have to perform so many of the same repetitive tasks. You got the carriers, the zip lines, you got all the fast travel points, you got all this stuff. But the thing with Death Stranding 2 is we've linked together America, right? That was the whole point of the first game. So now all of a sudden we're going to Mexico, which then turns out actually to be Australia, in this kind of, which is just a whiplash in itself. And there's also less of a focus on BTs, which they're not as scary, they're not as numerous, and when you do run into them, like, you can just drive your vehicle past them or shoot them with a gun, or just throw some blood grenades. There's more types, but they're just not as scary. The first game was kind of scary with that opening cutscene where the guy gets sucked in and everything, and then he's like trying to stab himself and everything. That was like, wow, that was a wow moment. And how void outs happen. BT's just bit lackluster in this one, and I think on purpose to focus more on the story and the human side and the mechanical things. But I think Death Stranding, as a series, has more of a focus on BT, so it's just weird to see. I'm glad. I don't enjoy the BT gameplay that much, but then that takes us into this weird, there's these robotic mechanical things coming from the beach and the other world, and Higgs is back, but this time he plays a guitar and he's all in red, and it's kind of just a rehash. And now Kojima does rehash it. Metal Gear Solid 2 is a rehash of Metal Gear Solid 1's plot, and so on and so on. So it's not bad in itself, but I really feel, and this is a general kind of statement about the game, is that it's lacking something. It's lacking. It's not it isn't a bad game. I'm not going to say it's terrible, but it's kind of like, just, it is a bit of a rehash of the first game, and it's just there's not really too much. I don't see where they could take this series further, because it's, no matter where you set it, even if he was to go to a different continent, the story does need continuing, I guess, but it's going to have the same general premise, which is you take big cargo across map, and that gets kind of boring and dull, and it's just it's everything about this game is screams Kojima unleashed, but in like the worst possible way, because it feels like when he worked for Konami, Kojima clearly had limits put on him, which he made wacky games and, you know, Snake Plissken and all this crazy unlimited ammo bandana and all these references and stuff, and we thought they were kooky and funny. But now he has his own studio, there's no one to tell him no. And with Death Stranding 1, because it was so intricately involved with PlayStation, I think we thought that wasn't the case, but it clearly was still. There was a little bit of like, hey, you have to make this make sense. Okay, Kojima, like a little bit, this has to do, you know, you can add your crazy, but this has to make sense. You know, in Death Stranding 2, there is a doll that moves at like 24 frames per second and talks, and there's a reason for that, but it's, you know, this whole game is even wackier and crazier than the first game. And looking back now, now the hype has died down, and you ask the question, is it really that good? I think it actually, you know, a lot of places gave this 10 out of 10, and I would disagree at this point. When you really think about how much story there is, you know, the story is kind of spread out a lot more than the first game, so there's a lot more delivering and traveling and fighting. Which, fighting in itself is something that, you know, you try to avoid in the first game. And then, when you do get the story, if you look at how many, like, lengthy-ish cutscenes are in this game, it's actually not that many. And it just doesn't make sense. Like, the fragile Lou thing at the beginning doesn't make sense, and then he thinks he's with Lou the whole time. And there's obviously Kojima's obviously trying to make a statement, you know, about trauma and things like this with Lou and Sam, you know, not wanting to let go and everything. But it's kind of just too on the nose. Like, we get that. We saw that from the beginning. Maybe he should have hidden that a bit so that the revelation, like, later in the game was actually a revelation. When Fragile is like, hey, there's no baby in there. And yeah, it's all just a bit strange, you know. Why has Higgs come back as some kind of member of robot Aerosmith from the beach? Like, what did he do over there? Did he get guitar lessons? Like, I mean, what? You know, and part of the wackiness, yeah, Kojima's known for it, and we enjoy it. But it's so unfiltered now that it's just a bit crazy. The Neil Varner thread was quite good. That made sense. That was interesting. You know, the rest of it, the tar man, like, oh, I'm missing a hand, and that allows me to travel the tar. It's when you say that out loud. I've never laughed at that before, but I'm laughing now. I say it out loud because imagine trying to explain this to someone who's never played a video game in their life before. So, yeah, without dragging this out too long, I don't think Death Stranding 2 is kind of worth the hype. I think it's not as good, really, as a lot of outlets made out. You know, that's not to say it's... I played it, I completed it, it's a good game, I put like 40, 50 hours into it. But it's a courier game, where you take things around. And I think, you know, Kojima's strength has always... You could say his stories have always been wacky, but there's always been huge story moments, like the end of Metal Gear Solid 4, right? There, Death Stranding 2 just kind of like is a little bit of a copy-paste, and the fact that they go to Australia just makes no sense. And, you know, like, Fragile turns up and she's got hands around her neck, and it's just a bit too weird. A bit too weird, where... Can we have some explanations for the weirdness, even if the explanations are weird? A little bit more, and... Yeah, those are my thoughts on Death Stranding 2. I think this leaves the series in a really weird place, because if... obviously, Kojima's now making this horror game for Xbox, but... Did they tackle another Death Stranding game way too quickly, is my question. Should they have just launched straight into Death Stranding 2, or should they have done something else first? That's what I want to know. If you're still here, like, I'd like to know your opinion on this, because I think they probably should have left Death Stranding 2 for another few years. You know, they should have worked on maybe the horror game after Death Stranding 1, or maybe another project that, you know, I think we've just got too much Death Stranding overload. And he's also moving towards a cinematic kind of universe too much, where I think Kojima is really... If you go back and listen to interviews with Kojima and read them, from the beginning he wanted to be a film director, and you can see that with you know, his involvement of Nicholas Wingdings Refn and all of these Hollywood celebrities. He's kind of trying to make his video games a cinematic masterpiece. And yeah, I mean, do you like that? I think it's kind of cool in one aspect, but I just think Death Stranding just isn't... I'm kind of Death Stranded out now. I don't think it's doing much for me. I think it would be cool if he kind of worked on something else and then maybe came back to this in 10 years or something, because Sam Portbridges and his story in Death Stranding 2 just did not compel me or grip me as it did in the first one. And there was a lot of focus on side characters and Lou and everything, but it's there's just a lot of questions around what happened to Lou and why, and how that kind of fits into the overall narrative and how it makes sense, and like the beach and yeah, just a lot of weird stuff. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Death Stranding 2. Let me know what you think below.